Hello, my fellow coders, and welcome back to our FreshVotes series, where we're going to be building a real-world Java web application from scratch, mostly leveraging Spring technologies and so on and so forth. So, in our last video, we were creating the what you call it, the registration screen for users. Also known as the user registration screen. So if I go ahead and boot up my Spring Boot application and go to our localhost 8080 login page, once the server starts up, we'll see that we have a create account button that when we click on brings us to a blank page that just says sort of register for an account. So in this video, we're going to be expanding upon that and actually creating some fields that we can input in order to create our accounts. So hopefully I can get that done in this video. So here's our registration HTML page. Inside of it, we're going to have a form, right? The form will contain the fields, the elements, the text boxes, if you will, to allow us to create an account. So essentially the three text boxes we're going to need, the three input type equal texts we're going to need are going to be for the username, which I guess we'll just call email address, because typically we use email addresses for usernames. We're not going to make this pretty right now. It's not going to look pretty, but later we will sort of refactor our code to make it look pretty. So we'll do that, and then confirm password. We usually want to make sure that when someone types a password in, that they have to type it again, just to make sure that they don't mess anything up. Okay, and then we will have a button that submits this form. Okay, and the name of the button will be, create account or something like that. Okay, so that's sort of the gist of the form. The action of the form will point to itself, and the method will be a post. Use post to create things, accounts, and whatnot. So here's like I said, it's going to be ugly. That's perfectly fine for now. We'll make it pretty later. Maybe the one thing I'll do is add one more line break between the confirm password and the account, or create account button. But now when I say create account and it submits the form, nothing's going to happen. Well, it's going to try to submit the form to that same endpoint, but then, well, apparently we're not allowed to do that. So it redirected us to the login screen for whatever reason. So this form doesn't work yet. So there's a whole bunch of stuff that we need to do before this will work. I shouldn't say a whole bunch, but some stuff. The first thing is, since we're posting, we need to make sure that we have a controller that's sort of listening for a post on this URL. So on the /register URL. So if you go to the login controller right now, all we have is a get mapping for register, which means it's listening for a get request, but not a post request. So we need to create a post mapping annotation that is listening on the /register endpoint. So we have the same endpoint here, but the difference is one is listening for a get and one is listening for a post. And the reason why it's listening for a post is because the method is post, and it's posting to itself. Okay, itself, but I could also put /register here, but that's just redundant. It's just pointing to itself. So you can leave it blank and it'll point to itself. So let's have a post mapping. And what should this return? I guess this will return a string. We'll call this register post or something. Or maybe we'll call it create account. Create account. No, register post. It doesn't matter what you call it. You can call it whatever you like. Not pod, post. Now, the few differences here are, first I'll import this. The first difference is when you have a post mapping, two things are important. The first thing is typically you're going to be passing data into this method. When you post, that's a typical thing. Typically you are sending data along when you're doing a post, because a post implies that you're creating something. Get something, post creates, put will update, and delete will delete. So those are the CRUD operations. Anyway, the first thing is you should probably send something along here. The second thing is it should return a redirect. And I'll explain why in a moment. First thing, let's focus on the data that we're sending in. So what data are we sending in here? So if we go back to our register page, we will see the data that we're passing in, really just email, address, and password. What does this belong to? This data belongs to something, and that something is what we're creating, right? So what are we creating here? We're creating a user, right? We're creating, if you go to my the domain here, we're creating a user. A user has a username and a password, okay? Ooh, and a name as well. I forgot about the name. We should probably have that as an input also. And in this case, the username is just the email address. So it doesn't matter what you call it here. I call it a username because it's used as a username, but really we want to collect an email address. So yeah, we're creating a user here. So that's what we're going to be passing in. We're going to be passing in a user object, specifically my FreshVotes user. There's a little bit more that we need to do here for this to work. But first, I want to go back to the registration screen. I'm also going to add name here. Input type equals text. We'll put a line break. So that way we're asking for a name as well. So when I refresh, name is here. So why won't this work? Why won't it just accept a user here and go about its business? Well, there's a bit of help that we need to give to our code here on the Spring side. So this is a Spring controller, and Spring is in charge of handling the mapping between the endpoint and the method itself, and it also will handle the binding of the data. Okay, that's what I'm talking about here, is the data binding. Well, what do I mean by data binding? I mean taking the data from the HTML page and putting it into, mapping it to the Java object. So we're translating HTML fields into a Java object that we can actually work with. And how we do that is via an annotation that we put inside of the method signature called, oh shoot, my mind just went blank. Model, is it model? Model attribute. Whew. It's been a while apparently that I since I've done this. So model attribute, I'm pretty sure, is the one that we use to tell Spring that this object, the user object here, is actually on the model. We want it to come in from the register page, and we're passing it into this controller, and we want to try to map or bind the data from the HTML page to this Java object. Okay, so I'll show you in action in a bit what this looks like. So for now, the second thing I said, there's two things. One is the method signature. It needs to take in data, which is what we're doing here. We're sort of taking in data by mapping it to an object. And then we need to return a redirect. So we need to return, and instead of just saying, return login, that might be what you want to do here. That might be your instinct, is to return login, because once you've registered, you want to sort of send them to the login screen. But really, we want to redirect them to the login screen. So why are we redirecting to login screen, or why are we redirecting at all? It's because we're doing a post. So this, have you ever been in a situation where you're on a web page, you submit a form, and then you try to refresh the page that you're on after you've submitted it, and the browser will come up and say, hey, you're trying to refresh the page. Are you sure you want to resubmit all the data from your post that you'd done previously? That's bad design. You don't want to do that, because you don't want to submit the same data twice. That's how you get duplicate records, and that's how all heck can break loose. So to avoid that situation, to get around the problem of the refresh duplicate data problem, is to redirect. When you redirect them to another page, it won't cache. It won't when they refresh that next page, it won't try to resubmit the data again. So you won't get that message. Nothing will be wrong. You can refresh all you want. There will be no duplicate data. There will be no duplicate posting of data. So that's why whenever you're doing a post, I highly recommend you redirect. I don't think I've ever found a situation where I didn't want to redirect, but that's just me. So, okay, let's put in a system out here just so we can see what's going on. I'm going to system out the user object, and I think in order for this to work, the user needs to implement the toString method in order for us to see something meaningful here. So I want to make sure, I don't think we've, so let me override the toString method, which is here. will generate a toString. So what I did there, I hit Alt-Shift-S, which brings up this menu. The other way to do it is to right-click and go to, what is it, source? Yeah, source is Alt-Shift-S. And then you can say generate toString, and then it just, it'll automatically generate a toString method for you. So when I say generate, it just sort of, it's a very basic method that just does some string concatenation to give a human-readable stringified method or stringified version of our object. So it just gives us a human-readable way to see the object in action. So all we've done here is our registration has a form. Our registration page has a form now that when we submit the form via a post to itself, the login controller here will actually accept the post mapping. It'll map the post to the registration page to this method. It will hopefully bind the data from the HTML that we've typed in to the Java object. It'll output the Java object to the console in such a way that it is human readable, and then it'll send us back to the login page. And actually, I don't like that right now. Let's send us back to the registration page, just because we don't have any logic here for the database. The database is not being triggered to do anything here, so this is setting us a login screen would kind of be annoying. But anyway, so let's go ahead and refresh the registration page. Okay. Name, Trevor Page. Let's say email address, trevor@craftycoder.com. Password is, let's just do ASDF. Oh, and I forgot, we also need to do some logic here to make sure that the password matches the confirmed password. But anyway. Ooh, and also, none of this is going to work, I just realized, because we need to do one more thing. Let's hit create account and see what happens. So in our... actually, the console didn't do anything, which is kind of interesting. But that probably didn't do anything because it didn't map properly. So I made a boo-boo. I forgot one thing. On the HTML side, the inputs, we need to also do some mapping to say this input maps to that particular property in the Java object. So for this input type equals text here, we need to map it to the name field in the user object. So actually two things need to happen here. There's another thing I forgot. My apologies. I keep forgetting, but this is how we learn. In order to map it from here, first we make use of Thymeleaf, which I talked about a long time ago with a few videos ago. We use something called th, which is the Thymeleaf namespace. So we say th, and then we say field. Field allows us to map this input to a field or property, whatever you want to call it, on the Java side. But there's one other thing I forgot here. In order to map it, you would say something like user.name. Okay. Now, when I say user.name, that's fine. That's what we want to do, except user doesn't mean anything. And the reason why user doesn't mean anything is because when I'm using this syntax, this $ curly bracket syntax, this is called Spring expression language. And the Spring expression language, what it does is it's going to search for an object called user on the model. Okay. The model being what the HTML page has access to in terms of the Java side. So what HTML can communicate with in terms of Java variables and whatnot. So right now there is no user variable defined on the model yet. And that's because I forgot to do that. So this is what we're going to do as well. So inside of the register page, when we're getting the page, we should be putting something on the model here. Okay, because when we load the registration page, that's when you want to populate the model. Okay, that's a very common thing. A get, and mostly post as well, but definitely when you get, you typically want to populate the model with something. And to do that, you can have a model called a model map that you inject into, that you put into the method signature. Spring will automatically inject this with a value, which is nice. But then you can populate the model with stuff. You can say model.put, and as you can see, it's a key and a value. So you put a key and a value. So what key value do you want to put? Well, back here, I have user is what I called it. I can call this whatever I like, but I want to call it user. So the key here is user. Now, what's the value? Well, the value is a new blank user account. Okay, a new blank user object, I should say. So what we're doing is we're taking a blank user object that we're instantiating, and we're putting that on the model, and then we're returning the registration page, which will include this model and will have this new user on the model ready for access or use using the user keyword. That's the key for that object. So user points to an actual Java object, user object. So that's why I can say user.name here. Okay, so user.name, when we first load the page, will be blank. User.name equals nothing, right? Because we have a blank user object. It has been instantiated, it's ready to rock, but there's nothing inside of it. It hasn't been populated with any data. And this is how we say, hey, this input text type field here will be mapped to the user name property. Okay, so same thing here. Th field equals, hopefully this will make more sense as I go, user.username. Okay, username is what I call the email address, but anyway, that's what I'm doing. And here, th field equals, hopefully you can see where I'm going with this, user.password. So name, username, and password are the fields that exist on the user. Username, name, password. Okay, the user Java object. Cool? So let's see. And then this one, the confirm password, well, there is no confirm password in the Java object because that would be redundant. We don't necessarily need that at all. What I'm going to do is I'm going to use this on the front end in HTML and JavaScript land. We're just going to do an HTML JavaScript, or rather a JavaScript comparison to make sure that these two password fields match each other. Okay, well, and we'll give this an ID. We'll call this, confirm password or something like that. Okay. Whew. So now that we have put a user on the model when we're getting the registration screen, and we have told Java and HTML how to map these things, this is how the register post method will know how to bind that data, okay? Because it's going to look at the registration screen and it's going to know how to bind this information, okay? So it's not magical. It can't, auto-magically guess that this input type without a field associated with it. It can't just guess that a blank input type equals text and that's it. Well, it can't figure out where to map that. It needs help. It needs you to tell it where to map it. Okay. So hopefully now this will work. Let's go back to the register screen. Let's type in, Trevor and Trevor at CraftDecoder. Password will be ASDF. So if I say create account, shoot, it's still not going into, so something else is going on. We have this controller annotation is mapped. The register, I believe, no, we've put that into the web security config. Register has permit all. I'm trying to think of why this method, it's not going in there. It's a little odd to me. It feels wrong, and it's redirecting me back to the login page. So it feels like, because it's redirecting me back to the login page, it feels like a Spring security problem. But I don't know why there'd be a Spring security issue with a get versus a post. Because what we're doing is posting. Oh, right. So this is new to me. I usually don't. We'll see if this is the problem. I just thought of something. I usually don't do this, but if you remember in some previous talks, we need to have a CSRF token. So whenever we're posting data, we need to make sure that we included the CSRF token. So that might be the reason why we're seeing this weird functionality, because we're not including the CSRF token. Okay. I don't know if we need to do anything from this end in order to make it work. I don't think so. So we'll reload that registration page. Ooh, now I'm hitting the breakpoint. Okay, that's this one. That's fine. I just wasn't sure what was going on here. So if we do Trevor at CraftDecoder, and name is Trevor, password is whatever, create account. There we go. Now it's going in. So it was a CSRF issue. There you go. Again, I don't work with CSRF that much, but apparently that's the kind of problem that you're going to run into if you forget to include the CSRF token. You're not going to get much help. There was nothing in the debugging console that would, elude me to, tell me, give me the hint that we're missing a CSRF token. So anyway, system.out println user. So if I go back into my thread here and say next, there you go. So it outputs user ID null, which is fine. Username is the data that I typed in, which was Trevor at Crafty Coder. The password was ASDF. The name was Trevor, and authorities currently are blank, which makes sense. We haven't done anything with authorities yet. And then it'll return redirect to the same page, the registration page, which then goes back to the get mapping, which makes sense. It has to get the page again because we're redirecting to it. And then it just sort of will bring up that blank page again. So that's good. That at least we've now done a few things here. We've remembered that we need to use CSRF tokens when we're posting a form. We have created a form that has 4 fields. We have told Java how to map the fields here, the text type elements. We have told Java and HTML how to communicate via the th field using Thymeleaf to map these properties properly. And then we have also obviously created the post mapping, which has a model attribute, which did the binding. So without this model attribute, let me just show you this real quick. Let me remove that model attribute, and let me go back in and put a breakpoint in there. And let me type in, Trevor, we'll say test at test.com and a password and say create account. Because I did not have the model attribute here anymore, I'm pretty confident that this user object will be null because it did not map anything. So if I hover over this, I'm completely wrong. So apparently we do not need to use the model attribute anymore. I'm going to have to do some research on that one because that seems like magic to me. Let me check and see the model attribute Spring. What is the model attribute in Spring? Is there person? Yeah, so it refers to a property in the model object, MVC. So let's say we have a form with a form backing object called person. Then you can have Spring MVC supply this object to a controller. Yeah, which is exactly what we're doing. Click here for an example using model attribute. On the other hand, the annotation is used to define objects which should be part of a model. Okay, yeah, that's not how I would use it. Let's see. Is there anyone that talks about the fact that we don't need to do this with Spring? Okay, let me do a complete refresh of my server. Because maybe there was some tomfoolery going on there with the fact that... Anyway, we'll see what happens when I completely reboot. Go back here, fully refresh the registration screen. Trevor, test at test.com, create account. No, it populates it. Beautiful. So there must be some update in, and this is brand new to me, folks. There must be some sort of update in the Spring MVC stuff, the Spring framework, or perhaps there's some stuff with Thymeleaf that it just works, and maybe that's a solution. Maybe I have been including that annotation ever since switching over to using Thymeleaf like a year ago, and maybe I've just through habit I've been including that model attribute annotation here, and I didn't need to, right? So it was apparently a piece of redundant code. So we actually don't need to specify a model attribute because I suppose because with Thymeleaf we're specifying exactly the mapping that we need here. So that's news to me. I didn't know that you could get away with not including that. So that's pretty cool. So there you go. We all learned something new today, including myself. So hopefully that was illuminating for you, and hopefully you enjoyed this type of video. Right? This is me creating. This is how I would go about creating an app from scratch. This is what it looks like for a real programmer to build a fully functional web application that will be used in the real world. I'm going to use this application when it's done. So this is me doing exactly what I would be doing in the real world, and this is me stumbling and fumbling, and you see, you know, warts and all, exactly the process that an expert developer like myself goes through, right? I've been programming with Java since, I mean, if you include the college years, 2002. If you only include, you know, professionally, you know, paid programming years, then about 2006. So, well, either way you slice it, I've been either programming for, you know, 12 years or 16 years, right? So I have a lot of experience with Java, but the fact is that this stuff changes so frequently that things like this can throw you for a loop. I did not know that you could get away without using the model attribute annotation anymore. So that's pretty cool. I'm very impressed. So there you go. You learn something new every day. And if you don't like this type of video, hey, it's free, so you don't have to watch it, right? But hopefully you do enjoy this. So in the next video now, essentially, since we've done this, the next video is going to center around taking this Java object that we have and actually persisting it to the database. Because right now we haven't persisted anything. So we haven't even created an account yet. All we've done is get the data ready for an account to be created. But to create an account is actually quite simple. So you'll see that in the next video. Cross your fingers that nothing goes wrong. And I can't wait to see you then. So take care of yourself. Happy learning as always. And bye for now.